challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. Some apologies for the somewhat late start. Unfortunately, I had some quite nasty connection issues, and so apologies. I'm sorry to everyone. Hope I haven't lost too many viewers, but thank you to all those who have nonetheless stuck by and waited for the start of the Gaggle. So really appreciate it. And obviously, there's a great deal to talk about, and I noticed that some people have already raised the issue of Orban and Zelensky, which I do want to get onto, and we'll discuss that. But obviously, the biggest issue of all is the war on Iran. And on Tuesday, if you recall, we discussed at some length the changing narratives on the part of the administration as to the origins of this war. So, if you recall, we had Marco Rubio first off declaring that what had happened was that the United States had come to the conclusion that Israel was going to attack Iran come what may, and then the United States drew the next conclusion, having that there was nothing whatsoever that the United States could do to stop Israel from attacking Iran, and therefore, in response to this supposed Israeli attack that was coming, Iran would respond by hitting American targets. And then, in anticipation of this possible hitting of American targets, the United States had to preempt this preemptive attack on the part of Iran and the preemptive attack on the part of Israel by joining with Israel and attacking Iran. So we had three sets of preemption that the United States had embarked on. Now, that was the Marco Rubio thesis. And then the very next day, Trump said, no, that wasn't it at all. Iran was apparently determined to attack the United States. Strange enough, why the United States, that Iran would do it, but yes, Iran was going to attack the United States, and Trump had to preempt this preemptive attack by Iran, and thereby he preempted Israel. So Israel was actually forced to enter this war against Iran because Trump had to preempt the Iranian attack by a preemptive attack of his own. So that was that thesis. And then the very next day, Trump seemed to have a very different thesis, which seems to be, on the face of it, that Iran was going to attack Israel, and that Trump had to attack Iran in order to preempt the Iranian attack on Israel. So let's just see what Trump said the day after the most recent explanation. Let's see. Okay, all right, so here we are, and let's listen to this.
There's 47 years they've been killing our people and killing people from all over the world, and I think we have great support, and I think if we didn't do it first, they would have done it to Israel and give us a shot if that was possible. And if we didn't terminate the worst deal, one of the worst deals ever made, the Obama nuclear deal, I call it the Obama nuclear deal, where he gave everything to Iran, including a nuclear weapon. It was a road to a nuclear weapon. Bad things would have happened 4 years ago because they would have had a weapon 4 years ago if I didn't terminate that deal. So we're in a very strong position now, and their leadership is just rapidly going. Everybody that seems to want to be a leader, they end up dead, and it's an amazing thing that's taking place before your eyes, because for 47 years we were pushed around, and we shouldn't have been. And I think
Let's just skip in what he just said here. Um, well, apparently they would have had a nuclear weapon 4 years ago. Quite how you go from 3% enrichment to 90% enrichment, which is what you need to get a nuclear weapon. I mean, he doesn't quite explain. But then he said, for 47 years we've been pushed around by Iran. That's quite amazing how a country of a quarter of the size of the United States, essentially still a third world country, is capable of pushing around the world's dominant military, economic, and financial power. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. And particularly as during this time, Iran was, for much of the time, was under sanctions, sponsored by, of course, the United States, but the UN Security Council went along with that. So under sanctions, and Iran wasn't able to get its hands on its own money. So in other words, those assets of Iran's were frozen by the United States. So, but apparently Iran was pushing the United States around. All right, so let's go on.
I can say, and you see it as well as I do, you see the tremendous progress that's being made. Their missiles are being wiped out rapidly. Their launchers are being wiped out. They're attacking their neighbors. They're attacking their, in some cases, allies, or not so long ago allies. And, it's really a nation that was out of control, and they would have used it on us if we let them, if we waited any longer.
So they would have used these weapons on us if they'd gone on for any longer. When exactly did Iran use weapons against the United States? Now they're claiming it, of course, that during the war that instigated by the United States in Iraq, Iran was using weapons, but that's still very much left to be proven. Leave aside the issue of Iran feeling threatened by having U.S. forces in Iraq to the west, and then, of course, in Afghanistan to the east. But the IEDs, the roadside bombs that U.S. Servicemen were having problems with in Iraq, were the result of homegrown rebel forces. It didn't really have anything to do with Iran. I mean, you can blame Iran all you want, but it was clearly, this was a resistance to U.S. occupation. So that's his thesis as to why the Iran would have apparently launched nuclear weapons against the United States.
The big factor was Soleimani, the killing of Soleimani. And maybe the biggest factor was the rebuilding of the military in my first term. And then the B-2s hit the, and I use the word obliterate because it was a complete obliteration of their nuclear potential. And that set them back very, very seriously.
All right, so he again repeats the business about this fantastic obliteration of their nuclear potential last June. Now, this is very interesting because if that is the case, that it was obliterated, then why exactly are you going back in 8 months? I mean, if it's obliteration, it's obliteration. We know what that word means. So obviously, you didn't get the job done. So why you keep repeating that it's obliteration? It's simple. We killed Soleimani. So you killed Soleimani, but apparently that didn't really do much good, since you had to go in and start attacking Iran, in 2025, and then again this year. So that's that. And now you have to do this again after 8 months. It was obliterated, and then you're going to do this again. It just none of this makes even the slightest sense. But it's fascinating, just these ridiculous explanations that he's coming up with. Okay, let's just finish this off.
If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. If we didn't do
Okay, so if we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. I mean, he just said you obliterated their nuclear facilities, but apparently within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon.
The B-2 attack a number of months ago, they would have a nuclear weapon. And when crazy people have nuclear weapons, bad things happen. So we're in very good shape now. I want to let you know that, and we will continue forward. But it's a great display of military strength, and I'm very proud to have, with some of the people in the room, both senators and congressmen, we rebuilt, and women, we rebuilt our military during the first term.
All right, so we got the business about how we rebuild the military. Now, the military, you have huge amounts of money. Each administration outdid its predecessor in spending on the military. So then, what needed to be rebuilt? Because we rebuilt it as if somehow it had been neglected, no one was spending any money. I mean, every single administration, they go, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump again, they all spend more than before. But then he said, we had to be rebuilt, as if apparently no one had been doing anything to the military. Well, now, if you look at what's happened today, the big news that broke just before we started was the firing of Kristi Noem. Now, the firing of Kristi Noem is actually quite significant because, of course, it means Trump needs to placate Congress. In particular, he needs to placate Democrats, and he has to placate Republicans. He knows he's in trouble. And he has to placate them because they are very unhappy with which was supposedly his policy, his signature policy, which was immigration. They were unhappy what happened in Minnesota. And Trump has essentially blamed what happened on Minnesota on Kristi Noem. I mean, he'd already essentially reassigned her and brought on Tom Homan, but now he's fired her. And that means that he's thrown her to the wolves. And it also means he's abandoning his signature policy, which is dealing with the issue of immigration. I mean, that's it. She's basically taking the rap. We're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to do what we did in Minnesota. We're not going to make attempts at deportation. Once you make that commitment, which is that you're not going to do deportation, then essentially you've lost the whole immigration issue. Because it's not enough to say, well, no one's coming across the border. That isn't really the point. Because that border is going to be opened up by the next administration. What's important is that everybody who's in the country illegally gets to stay. That's all that's important. That's all, because it doesn't matter whether you close the border, you open the border, whatever, but everybody in the country gets to stay. And when everybody in the country gets to stay, then in no time at all, there is pressure for, yes, amnesty. Hey, well, we can't have all these people, millions and millions and millions of people living in this country with very uncertain status. So we have to regularize their status. So you have to regularize their status by putting them on the path towards citizenship. And then, of course, that only encourages the next wave of immigration. So essentially, he's admitting complete failure, complete loss on this issue. And he has to, because he has to think about his political survival. And he has to think about his political survival because this caper in Iran is going very badly. It's clear, to the extent that anything I think is clear, but I think it is clear that he really never had anything more complex in mind for Iran than a re-Iran of Venezuela. I mean, it's amazing to think about that. You think, well, he's got something more sophisticated. You know, we just don't see it. But just going by the things he has said, he keeps talking about Venezuela over and over and over again in every interview, in every presser. He keeps talking about Venezuela. So they were planning on some kind of a change in personnel, but Iran is Iran, Venezuela is Venezuela, and the point was also that Israel was going to play for keeps. Israel wasn't going to go along with the Venezuela um, scenario for Iran. Israel wants at the very minimum, the clerical regime destroyed, wiped out, and therefore anybody who's within that regime is a target for Israeli assassination. Anybody. Therefore, whoever emerges as a possible leader will immediately be killed by Israel. And they've made it clear. We talked the other day about Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, who said, "Yeah, we will kill everybody whom the regime selects as its supreme leader. But basically, we're just going to kill all of them." So that puts an end to Trump's plan to have a Delcy Rodriguez, because whoever emerges as Iran's Delcy Rodriguez will immediately be assassinated by Israel. And then Israel has said this. So this is kind of ridiculous. I mean, Trump keeps talking about Delcy Rodriguez, and then Israel is saying, well, any Delcy Rodriguez will immediately be killed by us. So that's a kind of a problem. The other problem is, of course, that Iran has no intention of surrendering. They're not going to do it, and so therefore, all of the plans. The plans, first of all, we'll take out Khamenei, and then somebody will emerge and say, "Yeah, we're ready to do a deal." That's gone. We'll take out Khamenei, the regime collapses. Well, it didn't collapse. And then we'll take out Khamenei and the country collapses. That hasn't happened. So essentially, the United States and Israel have one option ahead of them, and that is to use air power. Now, air power is, of course, a real problem because that isn't going to cause surrender on the part of anybody. Iran's not in the mood to surrender, which is why, of course, now have the next round, which is, well, we're going to whip up the Kurds. So the Kurds are going to be our ground forces. Well, as should be obvious, the Kurds are obviously not strong enough to take on the Iranian army. They will be wiped out very quickly, which means that even if the United States provides air cover for the Kurds, and I guess that's the plan. We're going to provide air cover, but just as the United States provided air cover to the Kosovo Liberation Army, but even with the air cover, the KLA was pretty easily defeated by the Serbian army. So even if you do that, that obviously isn't going to work. So therefore, you're going to have to go to Plan C, which is to put in U.S. ground forces, because the bombing isn't going to cause surrender. They're not going to surrender with bombing. Nobody does. And I think it's clear Iranians are not in the mood to surrender. So you bomb and bomb and bomb, and then you realize, well, you haven't achieved any of your goals because there's no one in Iran who's willing to sit down and negotiate. So therefore, you have to put in ground forces. Now, if you put in ground forces, the most that you can accomplish is you can seize pieces of Iranian territory. I mean, something along the lines of what the United States did in Syria. You put your forces in, you kind of take over bits of the territory, and then you can create autonomous region. Maybe you could create a kind of Kurdish autonomous region. Maybe you could create the Baluchi autonomous region. That doesn't really help you. I mean, all it does is essentially weaken Iran, and that's but it's essentially a permanent commitment that uh, that you're going to have to just stay there as with years and years. Now, I guess they can do the sanctions routine that they did with Syria, and not which weren't UN Security Council mandated sanctions, but they were US and EU sanctions, which obviously caused a great deal of hardship for Syria. But Iran could probably withstand US EU sanctions because Iran does have uh, allies, and therefore this could drag on for a very, very long time, because then that isn't going to be conclusive. Remember, even in the case of Syria with Bashar al-Assad, that went on for a long time. It was 12 years before they finally managed to oust Syria. And Syria is a much smaller, much weaker state than Iran. So I think Trump has really got himself into a mess of his own making, and doesn't really know how to get himself out of it. So let's just look at a few of the scenarios that are being worked out. So here we have Trump declaring in a number of interviews that he will. Where are we? Up here we are. We're saying that he must be involved in picking Iran's next leader. So this is he says this to Axios. He said the same thing to Reuters. So I must be involved in picking Iran's next leader. Now, why is he saying this? Well, he's saying it because he can't think beyond Venezuela. I mean, it's like that. This is his one model. He seems to know no history at all. Um, all of the previous American experiences with regime change, in all their kind of varieties, all of which ended badly for everybody involved. But he doesn't seem to know much about any of them. All he has in mind is Venezuela. So I said, well, I must be involved in picking Iran's next leader. How are you going to do that? And so he says, President Trump told Axios in an interview Thursday that he needs to be personally involved in selecting Iran's next leader, just as he was in Venezuela, of course. Trump reveals this exclusively in an 8-minute phone call. His second conversation with us to explain his war planning or lack of war planning. So this is his second conversation. Then he says, Trump acknowledged that Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the Ali Khamenei, is the most likely successor, while making clear he finds that outcome unacceptable. So everything depends on whether he finds something acceptable. Then it says, for several days, the Iranian regime has postponed the announcement of a new supreme leader, but statements by Iranian politicians on Thursday suggested an announcement could be imminent. And then Trump says they're wasting their time. Khamenei's son is a lightweight. I have to be involved in the appointment, like with Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. I mean, that's all he can talk about. He added that he refuses to accept a new Iranian leader who would continue Khamenei's policies, which he said would force the U.S. back to war in 5 years. 5 years, more like 5 days. Khamenei's son is unacceptable to me. We want someone that will bring harmony and peace to Iran. So Trump, will bring harmony and peace to Iran. So he's pulverizing Iran, absolutely laying waste to Tehran. I mean, at least 1,000 have been killed, mostly civilians, of course. And he's going to bring harmony and peace to Iran. Trump's comments represent an extraordinary claim of American power over Iran's political future, further muddying the objectives of the massive U.S. military campaign he launched on Saturday. And there was Pete Hegseth and other U.S. officials have denied that the goal of the operation is regime change, focusing instead on degrading Iran's missile capabilities, nuclear program, and navy. So remember, this is very important that they always say, "Oh, no regime change." It's a little like that the mantra, "No boots on the ground." So no regime change. And the one that they used to, the one that it's gone out of fashion now, but the cliche, the wonderful cliche that American policymakers used to announce or enunciate was no nation building. So after Vietnam, every time United States got involved in any military adventure, you as policymakers said, no nation building, no, that's gone. No nation building. We're not going to do that anymore. So now we have, no regime change. It's the same bullshit. Just use different words. No nation building, no boots on the ground, which means A, you are doing regime change. B, there will be boots on the ground, and C, you're going to try nation building. That is exactly what they did in Afghanistan, and with spectacular failure. But here's Pete Hegseth, who thinks, I mean, he's a stupid man. I mean, a really profoundly stupid man. I mean, this is denseness of an extraordinary magnitude. I mean, he's just a Fox News talking head. So he's the Fox News talking head who thinks that if he just says things like, well, we're not going to do regime change, then somehow that becomes reality, even though Trump has said we're doing regime change on day one when he made that ridiculous video monologue, and now he says that in his interviews we're doing regime change. But he said no regime change. We're not going to have occupation. We're not going to occupy the country, even as they plan for an occupation. And anyway, so then Trump goes on to Axios. Asked Tuesday who could replace Khamenei, Trump told reporters, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So you planned for regime change, but you didn't clear it with the Israelis, because the Israelis have no intention of allowing anyone who emerges as a leader in Iran from surviving. I mean, in other words, Israel will assassinate anybody at all who emerges as a leader. Apparently, there are some of that cross purposes. He didn't, Trump didn't really clear this with Bibi. So he then goes on here Mojtaba Khamenei, 56-year-old son of the assassinated supreme leader, has emerged as the frontrunner to succeed his father. Though no formal announcement has been made, a hardline cleric with deep ties to the IRGC, Khamenei has never held public office. Israel bombed the Iranian building in Qom, housing the clerical body responsible for selecting Iran's next supreme leader. Well, of course it did. And then here we have, and then Trump compared the Iranian succession to his intervention in Venezuela, where Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, of course, he has, took over from Maduro, and then then he talks about that. Trump praised Rodriguez on Wednesday, saying the oil is beginning to flow after Interior Secretary Doug Burgum visited Caracas, and Rodriguez announced plans to reform the country's mining laws. And then here's Reuters, which says kind of similar stuff. U.S. President Donald Trump told Reuters on Thursday the United States must be involved in choosing the next leader of Iran, and said it would be wonderful if Iranian Kurdish forces based in Iraq were to cross into Iran to launch attacks on security forces there. So he says this is wonderful. Just about everybody in the region thinks that this is absolutely catastrophic. Iranian forces based in Iraq were to cross into Iran to launch attacks on security forces there. So that, they think, oh, that's cute. We'll start a second front. Now, these Kurdish forces will be defeated pretty easily, as they were by Saddam Hussein. They will be defeated pretty easily by Iranian forces. But that's not even taking into consideration what other regional powers will think about this. Turkey obviously is not going to be terribly happy about this, and if you're going to start stirring up other ethnic hatreds, other irredentist movements, other nationalist groups, then you're going to upset a number of other states in the region. You're going to upset Pakistan, for instance. They wouldn't be very happy with any Baluchi national separatism. Anyway, so then he goes on. Trump said in a telephone interview that he thinks the next leader of Iran is unlikely to be, Ali Khamenei's son, and then it says we're going to have to choose the person along with Iran. We're going to have to choose that person. Well, okay. Good luck with that. Trump also encouraged Iranian Kurdish forces to go on the offensive, speaking 6 days after the U.S. and Israel launched attacks on Iran on Saturday. The conflict has killed more than 1,000 people, including at least 6 U.S. service members, and caused damage and instability throughout the area. I think it's wonderful that they want to do that. I'd be all for it, the president said. And then we want to be involved in the process of choosing the person who's going to lead Iran into the future, so we don't have to go back every 5 years and do this again and again. We want somebody that's going to be great for the people, great for the country. And then when asked if the U.S. would provide or had offered air cover for Iranian Kurdish forces who are considering an intervention in Western Iran, Trump responded, I can't tell you that, but added that the objective for the Kurds would be to win. If they're going to do that, that's good. All right, Iranian Kurdish Migrant Consultant, and so on here. The Iranian Kurdish coalition of groups based in Iran-Iraq border. Okay. And now, this is where it gets quite interesting. So, the moment they start talking about the Kurds, it's very important. This is already essentially an admission of failure on the part of Trump. That the original plan that they had, the Delcy Rodriguez plan, is basically shot. There is no Delcy Rodriguez. I mean, it's clear from everything Trump said. Well, he's forlornly, bringing up happy days really all of, I guess now, 2 months ago now, two months ago, those happy days of Delcy Rodriguez, that's gone. We killed Khamenei, the regime didn't collapse. No Delcy Rodriguez emerged. Whoever Trump was planning on as the Iran's Delcy Rodriguez was killed by Israel, so that's already gone. The plan to bring about surrender on the part of Iran has basically failed. They're not doing it. If you saw the interview that Foreign Minister Arakchi gave to NBC, he said clearly, "No, we're not negotiating. We have no interest in negotiations." And I think that's very plausible because I think Iran has reached the conclusion, I think the correct conclusion, that there's nothing in it for us. Because all that'll happen if we start a negotiation is they're going to hit us, just as they hit us on the previous sets of negotiations. The negotiations last spring, which and that culminated in the June attacks, and then of course the negotiations that took place just before these attacks, and then we can go back 10 years to the JCPOA, all the negotiations, and then the United States just simply walked away from that. So they're not going to negotiate, and what Iran is now doing is raising the costs to the United States. They don't have to win this war. As I've said this before, they don't have to win. All they need to do is to raise the costs so that the United States and Israel know that this is a real problem, and it's raising the costs to the U.S. allies in the Gulf. In other words, they are realizing that this is very problematic. That somehow being there as American satellites is really a very dangerous activity. Now, of course, the media, as per usual, are that who are playing this nonsense of talking about how Iranian aggression, Iranian attacks on the Gulf. Oh, they're attacking, the Gulf states. Yeah, they're attacking the military bases. They are raising the cost for the United States. That's their strategy. In other words, all of the UAE, Qatar, Oman, they all realize that being aligned with the United States, allowing the United States to base their forces on their territories, it comes at a price. That's Iran's method, and that means that when Trump says, "Oh, we're going to do this again in 5 years' time," Iran is saying, "No, you're not going to do this in 5 years' time, because if you try to do this again in 5 years' time, you're going to find that your allies are going to tell you you're not going to do this in 5 years' time, and that if you are planning on doing this again in 5 years' time, you can pack up and go and take all your forces with you, because we're not going to have you here on our territory if you're going to use this to attack Iran again, and then we're going to get thumped by Iran." So essentially, that strategy is very shrewd. Now, obviously, there are questions about how long Iran can maintain this, but at the moment, it's looking like it's the United States that is trying to figure out what it should do next. Hence the sudden business with the Kurds, which Trump had not spoken about. He didn't speak about the Kurds on Saturday or at any time. Suddenly, they're bringing up the Kurds because the original plans have gone awry. But anyway, now we get to the next part of the saga, which is the claim. Here we have in the New York Times. Obviously, this is being leaked by the administration, claiming that Iran has attempted to reach out to the United States in order to negotiate something. So, and the New York Times just simply really totally credulous about this, because in public, all the statements that come from Iran have said there are no talks, and we are not seeking a ceasefire. So anyway, here's the New York Times. Iran's secret outreach highlights Trump's challenge. And then in public, Iran's surviving leaders have defiantly refused to negotiate with President Trump, to end the American and Israeli assault on their country. But a day after the attacks began, operatives from Iran's Ministry of Intelligence reached out indirectly to the CIA with an offer to discuss terms for ending the conflict, according to officials briefed on the outrage. So this is crap coming from the CIA. Oh, they reached out to us. And then it says U.S. officials are skeptical, at least in the short term, that either the Trump administration or Iran is really ready for an off ramp. And the officials briefed on the outrage said, still, the offer, which was made through another country's spy agency, another country's spy agency. Let's see now, which country's spy agency? Raises critical questions about whether any Iranian officials could put into place the ceasefire agreement with the Tehran government in chaos as its leaders are methodically picked off by Israeli strikes. So it's the chaos there, but otherwise Iran is suing for peace. And then it says Israeli officials who want a weeks-long campaign to inflict maximum damage on Iran's military capabilities and perhaps cause Iran's government to collapse have urged the United States to ignore the approach. For now, the offer is not considered serious in Washington. So what's the point of this article? The only point to this article is to reassure the public that Iran is supposedly suing for peace. So there's no evidence for any of this. And then they actually say, well, the Americans don't even take this very seriously. And in any case, Israel wouldn't take it very seriously. So why write this article? There are no negotiations, and no Iran isn't interested, and the United States isn't interested. So what is the point of this? And after saying for days that he was open to discussing a deal with Iran, Mr. Trump posted on social media on Tuesday morning that it was now too late for talks. Well, there were talks. It was Trump, who abruptly terminated the talks with the attack on Iran. The Iranian outrage and the chaos in Iran's leadership ranks as Iran's leadership ranks as the assault continues, highlights the key issue Mr. Trump faces as he decides what sort of Iranian government he might hope to shape or at least to settle for. So apparently it's all up to Trump to decide what sort of Iranian government he might hope to shape. He already seems to have stopped promoting his initial scenario of a popular uprising against the government, yielding a new set of leaders, and instead seems to view the best outcome as more pragmatic figures emerging atop the existing political structure. I have no idea what any of that means. At a minimum, Trump officials will expect any agreement to stop the bombing to include a pledge from Tehran to abandon or drastically curtail its ballistic missile and nuclear programs. Well, that isn't going to happen. They're not going to curtail their ballistic missile program for an obvious reason. That's as this onslaught, this war has proven, that's all they have. It's their ballistic missile program that has enabled them to survive. So this is their means of survival. I mean, the idea that they're going to curtail their means of survival when they know that within a year, 2 years, or even less, Iran and the United States are going to attack them again, the notion that they're going to curtail their means of defense is just ludicrous. Can you imagine writing anything so stupid? But the New York Times always manages. Well, like a minute to curtail its ballistic missile and nuclear program. That's their survival. Yeah, they're going to give up their means of survival, knowing that they're going to be attacked again within a year. And his support for foreign proxy groups like Hezbollah. In return, Mr. Trump has suggested that he will allow Iran's surviving leaders to maintain their economic and political power. Oh, so here we go, this Delcy Rodriguez nonsense. Notice that there's no mention here that, at least he's going to say, we're going to lift sanctions. No, well, he's going to allow them to survive. Well, that's awfully generous of you. He's going to allow them to survive. But no sanctions lifting. They don't get any of their frozen assets back. And then, first, it is not clear that Iran is actually open to a deal. Yeah. And despite the recent outrage from its intelligence arm, they now you see what this is what the Times always does. They first of all say something as speculative as to whether they made this outreach. Then they declare it as something that's factually based, that there was indeed an outreach from its intelligence arm, even though there's no evidence whatsoever other than unnamed figures in the CIA who are claiming that Iran has made this outreach. Some Iranian leaders may believe they can inflict enough physical, economic, and political pain on the United States and Israel to force an end to their assault. Yeah, I would think it's not just some Iranian leaders. I think that's pretty much a consensus among all of the Iranian leaders. This, if you listen to Arakchi's interview, that's pretty much what they're going to do. Mr. Trump already faces growing political pressure from Republican allies unhappy about the operation. And then, but even if you renews the search for an Iranian leader, as the government weakens, it could be harder to find a person with enough influence to compel the country to abide by a deal with the United States. To compel the country to abide by a deal with the United States. Who is the one who refused to come to a deal? There was a deal, the JCPOA, from which the United States walked away. The United States walked away and was unable to cite anything at all that Iran did in violation of the JCPOA. There was not. He couldn't come up with anything. I mean, all Trump did was essentially say, "Well, I promised during the 2016 campaign that I would walk away from the JCPOA, so I better walk away from it." But there was nothing at all that Iran did that was a violation of the JCPOA. So now the New York Times presented, oh, well, Iran, what deal? Iran was ready to sign deals in last year. Iran was ready to sign a deal this year. And as is obvious from the accounts of the negotiations in Geneva, and we know this from what the Omani foreign minister said. From his account, Iran made very substantial concessions. And it's not just that they made very substantial concessions, but that they gave Trump the opportunity to proclaim to the world that Trump, got a much better deal than Obama did with the JCPOA. So in other words, this was from America's point of view, not necessarily Iran's point of view, but from America's point of view, this was a much more advantageous to the US and disadvantageous to Iran than the JCPOA. And therefore, Trump could then say, hey, it was my toughness, peace through strength, blah, blah. And then he could proclaim that he had got this great victory. So Iran had given him that, and he still didn't accept it. And now the New York Times is talking about, well, Iran is going to do a deal. They're not going to deal. There's a deal, and Iran is not going to adhere to a deal. Anyway, just go on with this a little bit more. And here's and then it says, many analysts warn that Iran's government could soon lose control over remote regions dominated by ethnic minorities like the Kurds, or collapse entirely, leading to chaos and violence reminiscent of the civil wars in Syria and Libya. Now, notice how all of this is done in this passive voice. Could soon lose control over remote regions dominated by ethnic minorities like the Kurds, or collapse entirely, leading to chaos and violence reminiscent of the... Who instigated the chaos and violence in Syria and Libya? Well, I mean, who launched that war against Libya? Who launched the war against Syria? And then you say, well, chaos and violence and losing control. I mean, that may well happen, but as we've seen, the issue here with the Kurds, it's not like the Kurds are just sort of deciding one day, you know what? Why don't we rise up against the government in Tehran? No, this is being sponsored, funded, armed, sponsored by the United States. And yet, I mean, we know this. And yet, the way the Times presents it, well, they're just losing control. I mean, you just sometimes just lose control. What can you do? And then he goes, if Iran's government survives, the question may be whether Mr. Trump can find a more moderate interlocutor. Well, what moderate interlocutor are they talking about? Khamenei was a moderate. It was Khamenei who agreed to negotiate with the United States, first on the JCPOA, and to go on after the United States walked away from the JCPOA, to go on negotiating with the United States for a new agreement. Khamenei was a moderate. So find a more moderate interlocutors. Apparently it's the Iranians or extremists, not the United States. Not the United States, which just simply is refusing to adhere to any of these international agreements. I mean, it hardly needs repeating. Iran is within its rights to enrich uranium as a member of, as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So who's being moderate and who's being an extremist? The deals that were on the table, whether it's the JCPOA or the deal that they were discussing last spring, or the deal discussed in Geneva, all showed a great deal of flexibility on the part of Iran. Who's being a moderate and who's the extremist? And then so moderate, as he put it on Tuesday, that would mean someone senior enough in the current government to command authority, but not too invested in its revolutionary ideology. What revolutionary ideology? The only revolutionary ideology is coming from the United States. You had the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, blathering on to Tucker Carlson about territory that had apparently been promised to Abraham by God. That's your basis for for making a claim on in the midst of this a war in 2026. Well, apparently, at some point, what the date is, apparently God offered this land to Abraham. Well, that was very nice of him. And apparently that's moderate. The Americans are being moderate, talking about what God promised to Abraham. Past American presidents have negotiated with relative moderates. Oh, the relative moderates. Well, so notice how it's presenting Americans are the moderates. Americans who are pulverizing a country right now, a country a quarter of the size of the United States. So America alongside Israel, the regional superpower, pulverizing it. And now we're talking about moderates and so on. Within Iran's political system, who appeared open to closer relations with the West. President Obama struck a 2015 deal with a reformist Iranian president to limit the country's nuclear program in return for economic sanctions relief, and Mr. Trump withdrew from the agreement. Okay, so who's the moderate? Who's the extremist? Mr. Trump withdrew from the agreement. Thank you. And then here are some officials in the Obama administration hope the deal might empower moderates to open Iran to the West over time. But critics, including Netanyahu, noted that Iran's political system was controlled by its clerics and argued that the idea of a moderate there was an illusion. Notice the absolute total dishonesty of this paragraph. Iran adhered to that agreement. They signed the agreement and they adhered to the agreement. And yet their suggestion, as you read this paragraph, but critics like Netanyahu noted that Iran's political system was controlled by its clerics and argued that the idea of a moderate there was an illusion. They adhered to the agreement. It was Netanyahu who came with this crap, and which has been peddling for 30 years about how Iran is on the brink of a nuclear weapon. Trump walked away from that agreement, unable to cite a single infraction on the part of Iran. And now Trump himself is peddling this nonsense that Iran was on the brink of having a nuclear weapon. How do you get into a nuclear weapon when you have 3% enrichment? I have been involved in the search for an elusive Iranian moderate for 30 years. Robert Gates joked in 2008. Well, that's a good source of information. Robert Gates, former CIA chief. Well, I've been involved in the search for an elusive Iranian moderate. Well, I mean, maybe somebody is going to be in search of the elusive, American moderate. And let's see if we can just one more there. We can have. Want to see if I can. The just couple of other, since we're in the business of Looney Tunes, we have Trump, who is going on about the British. He's apparently very upset that the British, Keir Starmer, who had arranged a second state visit to for Trump. I mean, this is how Keir Starmer was trying to curry favor with Trump. I mean, you have to say the Europeans, they don't have any other idea in mind than Ukraine. They need to get Trump on board for Ukraine, and they just what they didn't feel that Trump's heart was in it. So Keir Starmer, came up with this wizard idea that, hey, why don't we invite him for a state visit? He likes all this pomp and pageantry. He loves the royal family. He'll really be very, very happy for a state visit. Indeed, Trump was very, very happy with that second state visit. Spent his time Windsor Castle. But then Starmer, while he kept a relatively low profile during the Denmark imbroglio, he decided he wasn't going to go along with this whole thing in Iran, or at least he didn't want to go along with the initial attack on Iran. So he's providing his bases. British UK bases are being used by the United States, but he was in some convoluted piece of reasoning. Starmer insists that, we're only doing defensive, we're trying to protect, British tourists and, British tax dodgers who are living in the Gulf. There's a lot of tax dodgers who are living in the Gulf. So we're basically trying to protect them, but we're not actually taking part in the U.S. Israel attack on Iran, even though we're allowing our bases to be used by them. I mean, it's very hard to follow exactly what this UK reasoning is. But in any case, Starmer has really pissed Trump off, because the Americans always feel entitled to get unconditional support from the British. That's what they expect from the British. special relationship. It's only a special relationship when the British join in with some American adventure. And when that doesn't happen, then the Americans get very, very upset about it. And Trump is clearly very upset with Keir Starmer. So yesterday he said Keir Starmer is no Winston Churchill. I mean, again, it's like it's with Trump, it's just like his thing about Delcy Rodriguez. It's like just his point of reference, Delcy Rodriguez. So with Trump, as with many Americans, their one point of reference with Britain is Winston Churchill. They don't really know anything else about Britain. I mean, it's like you think name one thing about Britain. I mean, used to be Margaret Thatcher, but now they've it's already an old hat. They don't really talk about Margaret Thatcher anymore. So now they talk about Winston Churchill. Well, one thing about Britain, Winston Churchill. So they say, well, Keir Starmer, he is no Winston Churchill. But now he's gone further. He has gone further, and he's now gone and called Starmer a loser. He's a loser. That's in Trump lingo, that's about the worst thing you can be. So here's the Telegraph, which gleeful, the Tory Telegraph, the Tory graph, is very gleeful and says Trump's new name for Starmer is his most derogatory yet. For the US president, the world is split into winners and losers, and the PM is on the wrong list. So the Telegraph rubbing its hands with glee. Now we've got Starmer. And then Donald Trump has described Sir Keir Starmer as a loser in conversations with friends. The US president was talking at a private dinner within the past fortnight when he dismissed Sir Keir with his most derogatory term yet. A source told the Telegraph Trump has started calling Starmer a loser. And he said it at dinner with friends. He just thinks Starmer has no future anymore. He has no future anymore. It's not terribly good English. On Tuesday, the U.S. president attacked Sir Keir over his lack of support for the Iran war, saying he was not Winston Churchill and ruins relationships. At a press conference at the White House, he also criticized the prime minister over his horrible immigration and energy policies, which is fair enough. And he urged the UK to remove Sharia courts and open up the North Sea to oil and gas. It came after he told the Telegraph earlier this week that he was very disappointed in Sir Keir for initially blocking the use of Diego Garcia, the military base in the Chagos Islands, for military strikes. Britain has refused the US permission to conduct strikes from RAF bases, citing international law. However, Sir Keir relented on Sunday night and said he will allow the US to fly missions from the bases for specific and limited defensive purposes. So you can see how Keir has got himself into the worst possible worlds. He's pissed off Trump, and he hasn't, at the very least, he could have adhered to a principled position the way Spain has done. But instead, he didn't do that, and so he's now, nobody can't figure out exactly what Starmer's position is. He's not supporting Trump, and yet he is supporting Trump. Yes, you can't use the bases to attack Iran, but yes, you can use the bases for attacking Iran as long as you're doing it for defensive purposes. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's the worst of all worlds. And then here is Kemi Badenoch. So the question then, of course, will arise, well, who's Kemi Badenoch? Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the Conservative Party. It's, it's easy now to forget about the Conservative Party, this ancient political party that was wiped out in the last election by Keir Starmer. And now it's decided that the way back to power, the way back to some kind of political respectability is by supporting the United States. Bringing back the good old days of brown nosing the Americans. And being tough. Bomb somebody. Attack somebody. That's bringing back the glory days of the British Empire. So there's Kemi Badenoch thinks that Keir Starmer is not doing enough to support the Americans. And so here's, and again, the Telegraph with Kemi. And so she said, Britain must strike Iran. Why? No explanation at all. Why must Britain strike Iran? Well, sure. We need to hit Iran and hit Iran hard. Britain must attack Iran, Kemi Badenoch has said. The Tory leader called for the RAF to help destroy Tehran's missile sites and prevent new launches against regional allies. Again, why? There wouldn't be launches against regional allies if you hadn't started attacking Iran. But anyway, here's then, she goes, however, Mrs. Badenoch told BBC Radio 4's Today program, sometimes the best way to de-escalate a situation is to try and finish it quickly rather than let it drag out because you don't want to get involved. So this is familiar. The quickest way to get Putin to the negotiating table is by providing Ukraine with all of its arms. Bombs for peace. We have to start a war in order to end a war. This is familiar crap. Anyway, the interesting thing is that, we always talk about how politicians are always looking at the polls. That's about the biggest cliche around. Or politicians are always looking at the polls. But in fact, politicians don't look at the polls. And that's why they get themselves always into trouble, because they don't pay attention to polls. They're usually preoccupied with some ridiculous ideological or chest-thumping concern, and they don't actually look at the polls. So Kemi Badenoch thinks that the way back to power for the Tories is to emulate, I guess, Thatcher, Churchill, who knows. And even though that's not what the polls are suggesting, that's not where the British people are. So here's, again, the Telegraph, which says the public wants to see a limit on Britain's role in the war in Iran, a new poll has shown. A poll of 6,285 adults conducted by YouGov on Wednesday and Thursday found 46% said Sir Keir Starmer should adopt a solely defensive position. This would involve shooting down drones and defending civilian areas and British military facilities. 26% said Britain's position should only be retaliatory, launching attacks on military targets that had attacked British targets or civilian areas, but otherwise not getting involved in the war. 8% said Sir Keir should actively join the US and Israel in attacking a wide range of Iranian targets. So that's the 8% that Kemi Badenoch is desperate to cultivate. So this is what I mean. Politicians don't look at polls. 8% said Sir Keir should actively join the US and Israel in attacking a wide range of Iranian targets, rising to 15% among 2024 Tory voters. 15% among the 2024 Tory voters. Even of them, 15% think that Britain should join the US and Israel in attacking a wide range of Iranian targets. And 24% among those who voted for Reform UK. So, and here again, we have Farage, who's also a big advocate of getting involved in this war in Iran. So 24% among those who voted for Farage at the last general election want Britain to get involved in this war. So that's the the opposition. So given how unpopular this is, we can I think safely say that Kemi Badenoch will lose the next election, because there's just no appetite at all. I mean, if you're embracing a cause supported by 8% of the population, and then you have Nigel Farage, who in the past had actually taken anti-interventionist positions, but now has become, now that he sort of smells power, so he thinks, well, I better become a respectable person, so I'd better adopt these respectable positions, such as supporting military interventions, and he's not going to win. He's going to do badly in the next election. I mean, I think Starmer, I think, will be reelected. I mean, it's a depressing thought, but I think that he seems to have understood where the British people are, and Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage don't. That's it. I mean, that's the quickest way to political failure. Um, and well, let me just a couple of other things before I say something about Hungary. So we have Chancellor Schmerz. Where's Chancellor Schmerz? Who we have Chancellor Schmerz, the German, the hapless German chancellor. He because you see, Germany has decided that as a way of expiating its guilt for World War II, only very specifically. There's only one thing Germany ever says that he feels guilty about. Well, keep in mind, it's not guilty about anything else. The one thing Germany always says he feels guilty about is what he did to the Jews. The Holocaust. Germany is always very biased. But everything else, like launching a war, in a totally reckless, foolish way. No, invading the Soviet Union without any kind of a provocation. No, it's never apologized for anything else. Never done any of that. But the one thing Germany always declares they feel bad about is the Holocaust. And so, in order to supposedly expiate its guilt, it's not really expiating its guilt. It's just a way of ensuring that Germany is always among the coalition of winners. So therefore, Germany does not want to get isolated in the world, and the way to get isolated in the world is to provoke the enmity of Jews. So that's why Germany always says we have a special responsibility toward Israel, and therefore whatever Israel does, Germany always supports. But apparently, that responsibility for the responsibility for its past sins, they don't extend to other things. So Germany's never quite explained why exactly the Palestinians should be made to suffer for what Germany did to Europe's Jews. What did any of that have to do with the Palestinians? What does it have to do with Iran? Because Germany has taken a very anti-Iranian position. And of course, that the special responsibility that Germany feels doesn't apply when it comes to Russia. So they don't feel in any way that, well, because of what we did, this rampage that we went on for 4 years on the territory of the Soviet Union, we don't feel that as a consequence of that, we should stay out of that territory. We should only be involved in making peace, mediating, making sure that no one gets any arms. No, apparently that doesn't apply. Germany's in the forefront. Hey, can we deliver more arms, please? And can we have more killing in the area that we were responsible for, millions and millions of people getting killed? No, we'd like to continue doing that. We'd like to send more arms. So apparently that they don't have any feelings of guilt about that. So Merz said the other day that Iran does not deserve the the protection of international law. Hmm. That's an interesting thing for a German leader to say. I don't think certain countries deserve the protection of international law. So let's take a look at what Chancellor Schmerz said. Um, so here is again the Telegraph, and it says, Merz, Iran should not be protected by international law. German Chancellor positions himself as Trump's closest European ally in condemning Tehran. And then Sir Friedrich Merz has appeared to suggest that Iran should not be protected by international law. In a major intervention, the German Chancellor expressed fears that such rules were becoming redundant in a world where rogue states broke them with impunity and allies did not enforce them. So again, I've already said this so many times, so I'm not going to repeat myself. Iran hasn't broken any laws. Iran has actually adhered to all of the rules of the rules-based order. Iran is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has made no move to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has adhered to all the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel, Germany's great ally, the state towards Germany always feels that it has to appease. Israel, however, has never followed any rules at all of the international order. Not just because of its refusal to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but its refusal to observe any UN Security Council resolutions. So we're becoming redundant in a world where rogue states broke them with impunity. But naturally, you can't name a single rule that Iran broke with impunity, and allies did not enforce them. He went on to say that now is not the time for Europeans to lecture the United States and Israel about legality. Well, that's a good. I mean, let's not, we don't need any lectures about about legality because there was no legality. I mean, you just launched an unprovoked war, something Germany knows something quite a lot about. So let's not start talking about legality. It's very funny whenever Germans say this, without any self-consciousnness. People will remember, now who talked like that? Bettmann Hollweg. And Bettmann Hollweg, Chancellor Bettmann Hollweg, was always regarded as one of the good Germans, but he was the chancellor in Germany in August 1914, who of course launched his invasion of France and sent his troops through the Low Countries, which was by doing that he violated the neutrality of Belgium, which had been signed with the British, and the British were supposedly were guarantors of Belgium's neutrality, and by doing that, that brought Britain into World War I. And Bettmann Hollweg famously said, "Well, you mean you're going to start a war over a piece of paper?" And so that's Bettmann Hollweg. As I say, he was actually one of the good Germans. But Merz just says this. Yeah, I mean, we need to stop talking about international law. We just, certain countries just don't deserve the protection of international law. And then, of course, we have all the various, the unprovoked attacks that Hitler engaged in. The most spectacular, which was the one against the Soviet Union, because in other cases you can say, well, okay, well, somebody declared war on Germany and and whatever. The Soviet Union there was no provocation whatsoever. They had a non-aggression pact. It was a total. It was the most shameless, overt violation of international law that anybody had perpetrated by his assault in Barbarossa. And then, so you want to have if you're a German leader, you always want to have at least some sense of perspective. He doesn't. He thinks that all I need to do is to keep in with Israel. I don't have to. Nothing else is expected of me, but always keep in with Israel. And so that's why he thought that that's what. Um, but anyway, let's just continue with the wit and wisdom of Chancellor Schmerz. Um, so yeah, so anyway, that's a broken international law, and it says Mr. Merz's comments made in a speech on Sunday positioned him as Donald Trump's closest ally in Europe and departed from his post-war predecessors in Germany, who viewed international law as sacrosanct. Well, they didn't really, but okay. If you want to say that, say it. But it's true that Merz has gone quite a bit beyond anything that his predecessors had done. I mean, some of them had at least made some attempt to show that, well, this is a different Germany from the one the world had become used to in the 20th century. Appeals from Europe, including from Germany, and condemnations of Iranian violations of international law and even extensive sanctions have achieved little over the years and decades. Really? You had the JCPOA, which Germany was a party to. That the JCPOA Germany was a party to, and it was the United States, not Iran, who walked away from it. The Chancellor said, as he blamed European weakness in part for failing to confront Tehran. He said the German government had concluded that when it came to Iran, international legal assessments will have relatively little effect. This is all the more true if they remain largely without consequence. Therefore, now is not the time to lecture our partners and allies. Now is not the time to lecture our partners and allies. All right, so that's Chancellor Schmerz. And I did promise that I wanted to say something about uh, the latest on Hungary and and Ukraine. I mean, obviously, we've talked quite a lot about that in the recently, and what we discussed was I think it was last Thursday was uh, Hungary's, I think, perfectly reasoned and perfectly reasonable fears that Ukraine might resort to terroristic acts against Hungary's energy infrastructure, and it's this is a country that has no hesitation about terrorism. It has no hesitation about sabotage, no hesitation about assassinations, and so it was a reasonable that Hungary, would fear that Iran might do something. I'm not Iran, Ukraine might do this, because let's keep in mind there is the Druzhba pipeline, which Ukraine is refusing to repair and to bring online, and so Hungary is not getting its oil from Russia, oil that it had paid for. It had long-term contracts with Russia. It had paid for this oil, and Hungary wasn't receiving this oil. So, however much they've complained to Ukraine, when are you going to repair the Druzhba pipeline? And Ukraine said, well, we can't, because Russians have damaged it, even though Ukraine has been regularly damaging the Druzhba pipeline. And then, Hungary said, well, we'll send an investigating team to Ukraine to inspect the pipeline, inspect the damage to the pipeline. Ukraine said no. And then even the EU got in on the act and said, well, we'll send a team to take a look at the pipeline and see whether it can be repaired anytime soon. And the Ukraine again said no. Now, Zelensky has, in the recent past, started issuing all kinds of threats against Orban. If you recall, we talked about this at the Davos meeting. He talked about the victor who needs to be smacked on the upside of the head, because Victor really wasn't supporting Ukraine's induction into the European Union. So he said that. And of course, at the Munich Security Conference, he talked about Victor's big belly, stuffing his big belly. But now he kind of went a little bit further, because he's not only is he saying the Druzhba pipeline is not going to come online anytime soon, and no, you can't come and inspect the damage done to the Druzhba pipeline. He's now taken to actually threatening Orban with violence. And what he said was, we'll give Orban's address or telephone number to some of our soldiers, and maybe they can just sort things out with him. Well, that's as explicitly a threat of violence as you can make. As that time is like, hey, we'll give his address, his phone number, or whatever to our soldiers, and then they can sort this out. So here is Zelensky's contribution today, and this is from Index. This is a Hungarian media outlet, and it says Zelensky threatened Viktor Orban. Zelensky hopes that no one in the European Union will block the 90 billion euro loan. Otherwise, he will give the phone number of the person concerned to the Ukrainian armed forces. Let them call him and speak to him in their own language, the Ukrainian president said. As is known, Hungary is blocking aid to Kiev, and in recent days it has announced that it will not contribute to it until the friendship pipeline, that the Druzhba pipeline, is restarted. And so it says Zelensky has threatened Orban. According to the Union news agency, the Ukrainian president has stated that he will give the head of state's number to the Ukrainian armed forces if he does not lift the blocking of the European Union's 90 billion euro loan and give his contact information to the Ukrainian armed forces. So, we talked about this before. Orban said, well, if Ukraine is refusing to repair the Druzhba pipeline, then Hungary will not support the EU's 90 billion euro loan. And Hungary will not support the EU's 20th sanctions package. Anyway, so give his contact information to the Ukrainian armed forces. We hope that no one in the European Union will block the 90 billion euros or the first tranche of it, and the Ukrainian soldiers will have weapons. Otherwise, we will give this person's phone number to our armed forces, to our soldiers. Let them call him and speak to him in their own language. And so the Ukrainian president at a press conference following a government meeting. And then regarding the restoration of the oil pipeline, Zelensky said that I would not restore it. This is my position. I also told the leaders of Europe that they will kill us. We will not give Russian oil to Orban because the poor thing cannot win the election without it. So he's basically admitting here. Zelensky is just shooting his mouth off, but he's admitting that this claim that he's not able to repair the Druzhba pipeline, which Hungary says absolutely you can repair it if you want to, and so no, we can't. It's so badly damaged, we can't repair it. So yeah, you can absolutely repair it, and he says here, I would not restore it. That's my position. I told the leaders of Europe that they will kill us. We will not give Russian oil to Orban because the poor thing cannot win the election without it. And then the situation is based on Hungary's intention to block the approval, through which Hungary wants to import raw. And according to Zelensky, Ukraine needs about a month and a half to complete the technical repair work. But he added that this may not be enough for Orban. The Ukrainian president believes that the upcoming Hungarian parliamentary elections are also playing a role behind the blocking. And here it is. We all know that there's no alternative to this money. That's the 90 billion euros. We know that one person is blocking it. It's not a secret. As I said, I've been negotiating with the EU. They said Ukraine should set a possible date and do everything to make this date public. Today, this date was announced, and we take about a month and a half to make it technically possible to repair the Druzhba pipeline. So it's essentially saying, well, we're going to take about a month and a half to repair this pipeline. Now, of course, a month and a half, um, Orban doesn't have that. The election is on April the 12th. So essentially, it's just a little more than a month has got this election, and obviously Ukraine and of course many in the EU, can't wait to see the back of Orban. They think they've got him. They think he's going to lose this election. As I said, I'm not sure that that's true. I think the polls are misleading. But either way, it's going to be it will be a tight race. But the question then is, and here I want to just point to Orban, who got obviously quite belligerent on this issue, and he sent out a tweet, if I can find this. So Orban says there will be no deals, no compromise. We will break the Ukrainian oil blockade by force. Hungary's energy will soon flow again through the friendship pipeline. And then there's Kovac, just quoting him again. This is the same thing as Orban said. And then Kovac says, okay, these threats and blackmail from Kovac is this spokesman for Orban. These threats and blackmail from Zelensky have gone far beyond every acceptable limit. When someone threatens to give a person's address to the Ukrainian soldiers simply because they do not support another 90 billion euro weapons package, that's not diplomacy, it's an open threat, it's outrageous. Personal emotions have no place in matters like this. Hungary cannot be intimidated, and we will not yield to blackmail. Now, the question is, what can Orban do? Well, one thing that he's always had the means to do, but he hasn't done it, and that is to stop electricity deliveries for Ukraine. The overwhelming majority of the electricity Ukraine imports comes from Hungary. Now, despite all of the problems with oil and gas deliveries that Ukraine has made for Hungary, Hungary's never really threatened to retaliate by refusing to deliver electricity. But I think that's probably where Orban is going. I mean, when he starts issuing these threats about what he's going to do to Ukraine, I mean, obviously he's not planning on going to war against Ukraine. I think he's doing it so we're just going to stop electricity deliveries. I think that's where he's going, and he's going to see if that might focus Zelensky's attention. It may not. I mean, Zelensky may just decide he's going to go for broke and have this confrontation with Orban, and figure that the Hungarian people will just simply, we think we can't take this anymore. We can't take this these constant showdowns. It's Orban versus Zelensky, Orban versus von der Leyen, Orban versus the EU, and they might decide, we just want a peaceful, quiet life, and vote against Orban. I think that may be Zelensky's calculation. It may be wrong, but I think that's probably what he's thinking. Anyway, let me now turn to our Gaggle locals page. So this is the Gagglers. These are the people who as I say, they're the people who keep the dogs happy, the dogs rewarded, and say, okay, well, you've done the work, you deserve something, and so I have to always respect and admire the Gagglers, for the fact that they care so much about the dogs, and they allow the the dogs to relieve some of their gloom. Anyway, so the first question here from a Gagglers, of course, a good friend Danaki, who says, "Kedves George, dear George, is there a bigger bungling moron fossil out of touch with reality than Captain Sergei Multipolar Obvious? The spirit of anchorage seems to be evaporating. Give the man a position and a place in the geriatric ward already." Yeah, no, that is right. I mean, Lavrov today gave a kind of, he gave a presentation. He was meeting ambassadors in Moscow, and gave a rather somewhat tedious speech. And then there was a Q&A, and he starts talking about the spirit of anchorage. And now, what's very peculiar about when he talks about the spirit of anchorage is that he says, well, here is the United States that almost certainly was involved in trying to assassinate President Putin. Here's the United States that was probably involved in an attack on our strategic bomber fleet. Here is the United States that provides intelligence to Ukraine for targeting vital installations inside Russia. Here is the United States that recently seized a Russian tanker in the high seas, completely illegal act. There's the United States that is making clear that it's going to go on seizing Russian ships in the high seas in order to raise the costs to Russia. As here's the United States that after this meeting in Alaska, even as he was imbued with this spirit of anchorage, after that, it imposed sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft. So which caused a great deal of problems for Russia. And of course, this was the same United States that actually forced Russia out of the Serbian energy market, because Russia had to give up its majority shareholding in Serbia's leading energy company. So all this was done by the Trump administration, the same Trump administration that the Russians have been saying, well, this is what, they have a very sort of realistic, view of national interest. They have, that we're on the same wavelength as they are. They understand us, we understand them. So he's listed all the things that the Trump administration has done since it came to power, a little more than a year ago. And yet he goes on about the spirit of anchorage. Somehow there was a spirit of anchorage, when it's quite obvious that there was no spirit of anchorage. And it is obvious. And I mean, I've said this before, and I'll stick by this, that if Trump prevails in Iran, if they actually do bring Iran down, and the Iran collapses, the government collapses, the country collapses, into chaos, civil war, whatever. If they succeed there, there's absolutely, I've not the slightest hesitation that Russia will be next. Trump will make his move on Russia, and they're going to do the same thing to Russia as they did with Iran. They will start off with decapitation strikes. They're going to start hitting Russia's vital infrastructure. They're going to start hitting all their energy infrastructure. They're going to start hitting all their military installations, their airfields, and whatever. But they'll have a certain amount of plausible deniability by suggesting that it was Ukraine that did it, or maybe it was, Azerbaijan will be brought in, and then they may even launch invasions of Russia, seizing pieces of territory of Russia, and then daring Russia to do something about it. So they're just going to create all sorts of problems for Russia. Now, of course, the response everyone will have is, well, you can't do that to Russia because Russia's a nuclear power, and if you do this, they're going to, let off, their nuclear weapons. All hell's going to break loose. They're ready to annihilate anyone with their nuclear weapons. Well, Russia has had every opportunity to do that and hasn't done so. So I wouldn't count on Putin launching nuclear attacks in the event of these various scenarios of decapitation strikes and whatever. But there's no question. I think Russia is next. And Lavrov seems to understand it some of the time. And then at other times, he starts going on and on about this spirit of anchorage and multipolarity and whatnot and whatnot. It's clear there is no multipolarity. This world is as unipolar as it was in the 90s. We were all kind of led to believe this idea, it's not the unipolar moment anymore, it's changed. Well, it's pretty much, world hasn't changed, right, so much. And it doesn't. And that, use common sense. Things don't change that quickly. It takes several generations before you can say, well, this isn't a unipolar moment, this is now a multipolar moment. No, that's not the case. So, and we can see that, one after another, Russian, Chinese allies have fallen by the wayside. We saw Maduro's gone, Bashar al-Assad is gone, and now Iran is under attack, and then of course Cuba is unlikely to survive. I doubt whether he's going to survive until the end of the year. So those are key allies. What's the pattern here? These are all allies of Russia's. One after another is being rolled up. That's not a good situation for Russia to be in. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And then Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. And Cynthia, as I always say, is our film expert, film scholar, film critic, with an amazing encyclopedic knowledge of film history and cinematic production, and the aesthetic of cinema, the work of different cinematic artists. And she always provides us with extraordinary detailed and fascinating information to accompany our weekly screenings. And so on Monday, we were screening The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. Not a film for everyone. I should warn, it's a little hard to take. It's not exactly a film that's enjoyable, but nonetheless, it is interesting. It's a film made by Peter Greenaway, and but absolutely, worth watching. And of course, as you watch, you can enjoy Cynthia's very informed and very interesting comments, and especially explanations for the aesthetics of the film. How and why Greenaway constructed the film that he did. So watch the film and read Cynthia's comments. Anyway, so Cynthia says here, the Oded Yinon plan is said by some to be a Zionist strategy to fragment Iran, Iraq, Syria, and finally Turkey. Last on the Zionist menu. Yeah, that's the Yinon plan. Yeah, that's right. Kurdish autonomy movements are viewed as a proxy in this effort. David's corridor links Druze areas in southern Syria to Kurdish held regions east of the Euphrates, with US Israeli presence at Al Tanf securing key routes. These moves suggest a deliberate effort to reshape the regional balance with Turkey as the final target. Any thoughts on this? Well, I absolutely agree. That's the goal. That's exactly the plan. Whether it succeeds, I don't know, but it's clear that there is an ambitious Israel agenda, and Israel has for years dreamt of an administration in Washington that would help Israel realize this agenda. Israel obviously isn't strong enough to impose its will on its neighbors, and certainly it doesn't have the strength to deal with powerful countries such as Turkey. So Israel knows that this is a historic opportunity. Israel will never, never, never again have a president in the White House who will be so open to, to fulfill the Zionist agenda. Whoever comes in next, who comes after Trump, will be much more critical of Israel and will want to distance the United States from Israel. So this is Israel's last chance. And that's why they've seized it on both hands, and that's why they're pursuing such a dramatic and expedited ideological agenda. They've got Trump, and they're going to get everything they can out of him. So all of this is clearly the Israel goal. So they've now created this this mess among the Gulf states. So the Gulf states, whom Israel despises and really hates, because they, although all they care about is making money, they nonetheless feel that in order to survive, they have to pretend to care about the Palestinians. They don't really care much about them, but they have to pretend they do. But now these same states are being forced into a confrontation with Iran, and therefore, quite likely, they're going to be, in some ways, really, really very badly hurt, and they will show themselves that America will be seen by them as a completely useless ally, and the United States, in turn, will see them as completely useless allies. So this is a way of marginalizing them. In other words, to force the United States to realize that the United States' only ally in the region, the only ally that's worth anything in the region, is Israel, because these UAE and Qatar, they're nothing. So in other words, Israel has been, I think, instrumental in provoking this confrontation between Iran and the Gulf states, and the prize there is Saudi Arabia. I mean, Israel has always hated the role Saudi Arabia has played in U.S. foreign policy all the way back since the 1930s. All the Roosevelt and Ibn Saud and the creation of Aramco. This has been the special relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And Israel has hated that because it's Saudi Arabia that exerts this pressure on the United States to do something about the Palestinians. And so the United States, which doesn't do much, but nonetheless they feel they have to do it in order to keep Saudi Arabia in line. So they obviously want to minimize the influence of Saudi Arabia, and I think they're very happy to provoke a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran and everybody else, because the more of this total, the whole of that order that first the British created and then the Americans took over, that whole order is just collapsing. And once that order collapses, then the value of the Gulf states, the value of Saudi Arabia, will disappear. And that's the Israel plan. And then the final goal there is, of course, Turkey. And the way you do Turkey is through coups, color revolutions, and maybe insurrections using the Kurds and so on. I mean, that's an ambitious agenda. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that Israel will succeed in doing that, because that's you know it's a tall order. But Israel is obviously going to make the best effort that he can in the 3 years that are left of the Trump administration. So absolutely, I think they're going to go after the Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, and then the prize is Turkey. So yeah, that's because, and then once the dream there is, once these states have been eliminated, then basically Israel will completely dominate the region. With nothing at all to restrain Israel, and then we can indeed realize that dream that Huckabee talked about with Tucker Carlson, about that huge chunk of land that God had promised Abraham, and that chunk of land that Israel has set its eyes on. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia, for that, for your insight there. Really appreciate that. And thank you for your contribution. And then Carlos FR, nice to see you again. Maybe Trump has given up trying to run things and it's just a wag the dog situation. Well, it is in a way a kind of a wag the dog, and I can't say I fully understand it. I mean, I think there are aspects to this relationship with Netanyahu that it's not yet clear. I mean, I don't think. I think we'll find out more as time goes on. What is the basis of this relationship? Why does Netanyahu have this hold on Trump? How does it come about that Netanyahu gets to visit the White House 6 times? I mean, how does that happen? No one else gets to do that. How does that happen? So why Trump's doing this now? The theory that I had, and I don't know if that's true, is that Trump is thinking about his post presidential years, when he's going to be beset with lawsuits, criminal prosecutions, and he's going to need lots and lots of money on his legal fees, and he thinks that this is the way to ensure that he's going to be well looked after. I think that's a naive gamble on his part. Israel in general and Netanyahu in particular are extremely ungrateful. They've never been said thank you for anything ever. It's because if you recall, in 2020, Netanyahu was among the first to congratulate Biden on his election win. So if Trump thinks that the Zionists, the Israel lobby, are going to look after him after he leaves office, then he's stunningly naive. But anyway, thank you, Carlos. And then Vic Shakapopoulos, good to see you. Vic says, "Dear George, are you familiar with Boris Malagorski's films? His opus magnum is the Weight of Chains trilogy about the destruction of Yugoslavia and its aftermath." Yes, I've seen the film, and I was in fact interviewed by Boris Malagorsky, and that interview, I think you can find. I think it's been posted here on the Gaggle, but certainly you can find it on Malagorsky's website. It's quite a long interview, and so you can watch my interview. Yeah, it's a good film, pretty decent, and he does good work. So yeah, I mean, it's not as good, obviously, as my book, Bombs for Peace, but it's okay. Anyway, thank you for bringing up. But yeah, listen to the conversation that I had with him. I think it's quite interesting. Anyway, thank you. And Anne Marie, it was always very good to see you. As I always introduce Anne Marie by saying, she's an internationally renowned musician, plays with the most outstanding orchestras in the world, has worked with the most distinguished composers and conductors and musicians of the 20th and 21st centuries. And it's just always incredible that we have her here in this Gaggle community, and we always enjoy her extraordinary insights and learned observations about music and everything else here, and particularly when we post pieces of music on the Gaggle Music Club. And so we're fortunate when Anne Marie has the time to explain the finer points of playing very difficult pieces of music. So always look forward to that. I'm really enjoying them so much. I know all Gagglers really enjoy them, and are somewhat in awe of her and her performances, as well of her comments. So thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you very much for your generosity. And here is Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. And Marty has a a tweet from Jonathan Karl. Now, Jonathan Karl is one of the few people who has spoken to Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson has posted a lengthy podcast about the attack on Iran, and obviously highly critical of Trump, but still he feels a kind of restraint. I mean, Trump is a friend of his, so he's not exactly feeling comfortable attacking his friend. But nonetheless, it's Tucker's video. I think it must be about an hour and a half or something. It's well worth listening to. He presents the case very well. But anyway, he had a conversation with Jonathan Karl. I mean, Karl obviously called him up, and let's just read out what Karl says in this tweet. It says, in a lengthy conversation just now, President Trump hit back at Tucker Carlson, who called the Iran war absolutely disgusting and evil. So that was what Jonathan Karl had written in his earlier tweet, that Tucker Carlson told him the Iran war is absolutely disgusting and evil. Now Jonathan Karl quotes Trump. So Trump apparently spoke to Jonathan Karl and says, Tucker has lost his way. Trump told me, I knew that a long time ago, and he's not MAGA. Really, he's not MAGA. MAGA is saving our country. MAGA is making our country great again. MAGA is America first, and Tucker is none of those things. And Tucker is really not smart enough to understand that. All right, so now this is very interesting because it says, well, he's not smart enough to understand MAGA, because of course this is not MAGA, it's about Israel. There's nothing here about making America great again. It's all about Israel. And now he makes a crack about Tucker. Tucker's lost his way. Tucker's really not smart enough to understand that. So he's now attacked Marjorie Taylor Greene, and now he's attacking Tucker Carlson. That's not a good move, because I think Tucker Carlson has a huge platform. I don't think he's going to be much intimidated by Trump distancing himself from him. Tucker doesn't really need Trump, and essentially Trump's doing what he did with this tweet that Marty has posted. He's essentially making things easy for Tucker. Tucker can just basically now attack Trump to his heart's content. Up until now, as I said, he felt a little restrained by his personal friendship with Trump. I don't think he's going to be restrained anymore. Um, as I said, was I don't know, last week or the week before, Tucker now has the inside track on presenting himself as the real voice of MAGA, as the real voice of America First. He can now present himself as the true heir to Pat Buchanan. You remember Trump really appropriated the ideas of Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul and Ross Perot. I mean, Trump never seriously adhered to those views, but he saw that as his way to the Republican nomination in 2016. So he just stole the ideas of Buchanan and Ross Perot and so on. I think Tucker is genuinely a kind of the true heir apparent of Pat Buchanan, and so that'd be quite interesting because I think J.D. Vance is completely discredited through his association with Trump, and so it's hard to see who will adopt the mantle of America First. I mean, it's now kind of a joke, given how these Trump supporters have discredited themselves by uh, by, by mindlessly following Trump on this ridiculous war. So this is the opening that Tucker has been waiting for. I don't know if he's going to do it, and maybe Tucker doesn't want to do it. Maybe he doesn't have the energy or the enthusiasm for running a presidential campaign. But he can genuinely say, yeah, basically, Trump betrayed us. Trump lied to us. Trump used us. And he never believed in making America great again. His agenda was always make Israel great again. I mean, he fooled us during his first term because he was still seeking a re-election at the time. So he pursued a relatively restrained foreign policy within reason. He still gave Israel everything it wanted, but nonetheless, nothing like this, nothing like waging wars on behalf of Israel. I mean, he gave all this thing about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights, and so on, but nothing like this. So I think that's very interesting. We'll see whether Tucker kind of uh, follows through on that. Interestingly, is where's somebody can tell me. I haven't seen too much from Elon Musk on all of this, so I don't know. So what position has Elon Musk adopted on Iran? Anyway, here's a picture that that Marty has posted. I guess, this is a photo of a meeting that took place a few days before the attack on Iran, because we were told that Tucker was there meeting with Trump, and Tucker was obviously urging him not to not to undertake this attack. So Tucker's view was there, but almost all the views, everyone else, were warlike. So here's Marco Rubio and Tucker enjoying some kind of a joke, and of course there's Susie Wiles, who seems to be this ubiquitous presence. She's always there, which I find just very strange for a White House chief of staff who always seems to be attending these high level security meetings. Anyway, so that's yeah. But I think that's a photograph, obviously, from that meeting a few days before the the decision to bomb Iran. So anyway, and then Marty says America's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in negotiations with Israel regarding its nuclear program. So let's look at another picture, and there they are. Um, Witkoff, Kushner. I don't know who the others are. Yeah, so there they are. And that's what a nice. It is kind of. If you're the Iranians, and you're engaging in negotiations. And the American side is represented by Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is a family friend of the Netanyahus. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu used to say at his father's house in New Jersey, Charles Kushner. So that's so Bibi is a family friend of Jared, and then of course Witkoff is an ardent Zionist. So that's America's negotiating team, and there they are shaking hands with Bibi. Obviously honest brokers, absolutely honest brokers. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty, and really appreciate your generosity. And then we have NKMRD. Says, yesterday I watched former CDU Chancellor candidate Armin Laschet. Yeah, I remember him. He was, yeah, I mean, he always seemed better than Schmerz. Okay. Armin Laschet saying that Iran violated international laws due to several issues. Okay. I almost dropped my coffee when he mentioned that Iran's overthrowing of Assad, you read correctly, was one of the violations. Really? So he said that. I mean, that's a reflection of just how ill-informed so many these politicians are. These are the people making fundamental decisions, and that, of course, applies to Trump. And the lack of proper information at their disposal. I mean, it's like Trump talking endlessly about Delcy Rodriguez. Oh, Delcy, we are looking for the Delcy Rodriguez in Iran. Somebody should tell him, hey, that's Iran. Iran is Iran. Venezuela is Venezuela, and they have nothing in common. There isn't a Delcy Rodriguez in Iran. And so that's it. So Iran's overthrowing of Assad, okay, was one of the violations. I barely believe anyone in this country even cares anymore about anything. Sometimes, I suppose so. I'm kind of very pessimistic about Germany. I don't think anything can change. I actually think that there's all the hope that somehow there's going to be a breakthrough. The AfD will do this, and Sarah Wagenknecht will do that. I think none of that is going to happen. So, yeah. So, Armin Laschet, just it's really pathetic. Anyway, thank you so much, NKMRD. And then Cynthia says, Laith Marouf explained in an interview with Nima that Iran won't target U.S. aircraft carriers unless nuked, since they don't want to risk contaminating the waters from nuclear reactors. Okay, it's probably true. Iran has already hit 2 U.S. supply ships, but striking a carrier would be a major escalation they'd likely avoid. Still, this gives Israel 2 risky ways to push the U.S. 1, a false flag attack on a carrier, and 2, a nuclear strike on Iran to provoke a retaliatory attack on U.S. carriers. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. I'd say Iran is so far relatively restrained. They haven't used their hypersonic missiles. They may be waiting to use them, and will use them if they have to, if in the event of some major attack beyond just simply pulverizing Tehran. So I think that's a possibility. I think obviously they are wary of everything that the United States can do. But I'm not sure hitting an aircraft carrier is that easy. I mean, they are very well defended. I mean, that's where you've got some serious defensive missiles. So I don't know how easy it is to hit an aircraft carrier, but I think that Iran is holding back for the time being. So they haven't used the hypersonic missiles, as I say. But the other aspect of it is, of course, that there's always the danger that Israel would resort to nuclear weapons. I mean, Israel isn't bound by the same restraints that other powers are bound by. All nuclear powers in the past have been bound by restraints, which is you never resort to nuclear weapons. They've only ever been used once in 1945, and no one has ever used them since. So, but Israel is very different. Israel isn't bound by those restraints, and so Israel would, without hesitation, would use nuclear weapons. I mean, there's just absolutely, they wouldn't hesitate to use nuclear weapons. Um, so that's a possibility. False flag attack, absolutely. They could do a false flag. Um, it seems to me there have been a number of Israeli false flag attacks. I mean, I don't have proof of that, but for instance, this attack on Azerbaijan. Um, Azerbaijan immediately rushed out an accusation against Iran. Iran denied that it had attacked Azerbaijan. And Iran says Israel did this as a false flag attack. I find it believable. I don't think Iran wants to bring Azerbaijan into this war. It's just going to be a huge headache for Iran. So I don't believe Iran would have just simply launched an attack on Azerbaijan. So there's that. The attack on the Saudi oil refinery, I think that was also a false flag attack. I think Israel was behind that. So there's already been, I think, a lot of Israeli false flag attacks in order to provoke other countries into going to war against Iran. The attack on Turkey, Turkey said, well, we shot down I think it was either an Iranian missile or an Iranian drone that coming at us. Iran denied that. He said we never attempted to attack Turkey. So I think there's already been these false flag attacks from Israel. So I think absolutely there's a real danger that there could be an attack, a false flag attack on an aircraft carrier in order to provoke the United States into an even more savage attack on Iran. And I mean, a nuclear strike on Iran, I think that could happen if this war drags on. I mean, if it continues inconclusively, then it's one of those things. Israel could easily do that in order to essentially put America on the spot and say, well, now you have to finish the job off. And I think that's always the danger that Israel would do this, in order. I mean, they've got Trump worked out to a T. Hey, we're going to do this in order to get America firmly committed to regime change and probably occupation or whatever Iran, and maybe even using nuclear weapons against Iran by the United States. So Israel is very good at presenting fait accompli. So I think all of those scenarios, those nightmare scenarios, are very plausible, Cynthia. Anyway, my time is up, and in fact, my time came to an end already a while ago. So thank you so much, everybody who had joined me. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting comments and questions, and really appreciate all of that. We'll see what happens, and I we'll be doing more of these podcasts over the weekend. I should say, before I go, I will be in Belgrade next week, just for a couple of days. We're having a conference on Milosevic. As you know, kind of one of my favorite subjects. So there'll be a conference on Milosevic from Belgrade, and on Tuesday, I hope, barring any problems with the the internet and whatever, I'll be able to do a live stream from Belgrade, and I will report to Gagglers about the Milosevic conference. So that's on Tuesday, and well, we'll see how that goes. So otherwise, we'll do whatever podcast we can over the next few days, and thank you very much for today. See you from Belgrade. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.